Good afternoon. Welcome to the University of Manitoba Alumni and Friends Virtual Learning for Life series. My name is Tracy Bowman. I'm the Director of Alumni Relations and a proud alumna. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. As I share this traditional territorial acknowledgement, I found myself thinking about the tragic loss and grieving for the souls of 215 children whose remains were found at the former Kamloops Indian residential school site. As we reflect on the history of residential schools and their ongoing impacts, we must do better as a community and as individuals, continue to learn, engage in dialogue, listen, and take action. I encourage you to visit the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation website for more information on honoring and preserving residential school truths for all time. So thank you everyone for joining us and making this event part of your day, whether you're watching it live or whether you're watching it after the fact. This is our 4th Virtual Learning for Life series. We've offered alumni and friends around the world since the start of the global pandemic. We've seen great interest in this program and we're so glad that you're here with us today. All previous lectures live on our website, so please go to the alumni section on umanitoba.ca and you're able to look at all the Virtual Learning for Life sessions. There's about 27 or 28 of them since last May. So I encourage you to do that. Share them with friends and family. You can watch it as many times as you'd like. Lots of great content, lots of great topics. We're also able to offer this program free to all of our alumni and friends, thanks to the generous sponsorship of our affinity partner, IA Financial Group. Many thanks to them. You can learn more about the insurance options that they offer alumni also on the alumni website. So before we begin and before I introduce today's speaker, just a few housekeeping details. I've already mentioned that we're recording this session right now, so you're able to see it after the fact as many times as you'd like. Our format today is fairly similar to previous weeks where after I introduce our speaker, he will be presenting for about 35-40 minutes, and then we will open it up to you for questions. I encourage you to open the platform Slido, that's slido.com, with the password VLFL2. And you're able to enter your questions at any time. So I encourage you to add that to your website browser right now, so you're there. As soon as a question hits you, you're able to ask that right away. And we will try to get through as many questions as we can. Not always can we do that, but we will do our very best. So now I'm delighted to introduce today's presenter, who is Dr. Robert Mizzi, who is the Associate Professor within the UM's Faculty of Education. And he will be speaking on the topic of LGBTQ teachers working overseas, a Photovoice story. This topic is especially timely given that June is Pride Month, so I wish all of you a happy Pride. Let me tell you a little bit about Robert before he gets started. He is a Canada Research Chair in Queer, Community and Diversity Education, and as I mentioned, an Associate Professor within the Faculty of Education. He has over 200 publications and presentations, including articles published in the Journal of Homosexuality and the Journal of Studies in International Education. He's also published 5 books, with the most recent being the Handbook of Adult and Continuing Education by Stylists and the American Association for Adult and Continuing Education. Dr. Mizzi is President Emeritus of the Canadian Association of Adult Education and is the current Editor-in-Chief of the Canadian Journal for the Study of Adult Education. So with that, over to you, Dr. Mizzi.
Thank you so much, Tracy. And it's good to be here and to meet all of you virtually in this very novel space. And so today I will be sharing the research on LGBT teachers working overseas. And what brought me to this research is that I am a member of the LGBT community, and I taught overseas for in Japan and the United Kingdom and Kosovo and other places for over 5 years. And so I experienced homophobia in the various communities and in my workplaces, and with little knowledge of how to gain support or where I could find support in general, especially in countries where English isn't the main dominant language. There is a great deal of literature on the LGBT teacher in various Western contexts. So, for example, if you're a Canadian teacher and you're an LGBT teacher, there in a Canadian context, well, there's lots of research there, and as well as within the US context and so forth. But there's hardly any research that looks at LGBT teachers who cross national borders to teach. And I think this is a particularly timely topic, given how the teaching profession has gone global. And now you can work anywhere or almost anywhere in the world as an international teacher, mainly for those who work live in Western countries and then they move over to non-Western spaces. But even in my previous studies on immigrant queer educators, there is some movement there as well that needs to have some further exploration. So just to put you into a bit of context for this research, I'd like to just highlight that there are 67 United Nations member states that criminalize consensual same-sex sexual acts. So there's 67 countries that still criminalize homosexuality, which makes it very difficult for those of a lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or otherwise queer background, or perhaps they don't even use those terms, but they are same-sex sexualities or they are gender minorities of some background. Including within those 67, there are countries that are actively recruiting international teachers. And there's a short list right there that I've provided for you on the screen. So there is a movement to bring in teachers into those countries and to have them teach in their schools, whether the international schools, private schools, or language schools and such, which makes it a little bit tricky, again, if you're from an LGBT background. So LGBTQ people can be at greater risk for state-sanctioned violence and social prejudice. For example, an international school in Hong Kong banned gay teachers from being employed there due to a highly discriminatory morality code. And so anyone who was assumed to be gay or thought of to being that way, they were fired from their position. So that's just an example of where there is, we're entering into a new chapter within international education, and one that seems to be exclusive of the LGBTQ reality. So over the past decade, there has been an increase of reports of physical violence, imprisonment, and job termination of international educators due to an assumption of homosexuality. And so we need to take these developments seriously because your human lives at risk, their careers, their families, their relationships, everything is at risk. And we need to think about how we could change schools so that they're much more supportive of the LGBTQ teacher coming in from other places. So the study itself, I have to acknowledge that this study was sponsored from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. So I'm thrilled that they saw, and the reviewers of my grant application saw great value in this project. And what the purpose of it was to have, it was a 2-year project, was to understand how LGBTQ international educators navigate their sexuality and gender difference as they cross borders into new workplaces and new communities. So in this study, I focus on those international educators with Western backgrounds moving into non-Western spaces. So predominantly Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, the Middle East. So sometimes that can be a little blurry, but that's what we tried to stick with, just to have a little bit more focus to the study. The study objectives were to identify how the political landscapes of the destination context influence LGBTQ international educators, to analyze how LGBTQ international educators articulate their sexuality and gender identity difference in their workplaces and communities, and to determine the usefulness of Photovoice involving LGBTQ international educators, which I'll be speaking about that methodology in a bit. So participant backgrounds. we recruited 23 LGBTQ international educators who come from various sexuality and gender backgrounds. So you can get a sense of who all participated. And you can see right away that we did cover the range within the LGBTQ. However, there is quite a heavier emphasis here of gay men, cisgender gay men, who did participate in the study. And those are the people who volunteered, who stepped forward to talk to us. And we think that there is some diversity there, but we could also see where there's some room for growth, particularly around transgender, bisexual, lesbian, or even queer identified educators. But we can go for, hopefully this study will just give us some impetus to go further and go deeper into the different nuanced experiences of being an LGBTQ international educator. Now, the participants originated from various Western countries: Canada, the United States, United Kingdom, and Spain. And so those were the ones who we felt that, they could really speak to their experiences. And we're very thankful that we were able to conduct recruitment through international teachers magazines, other universities, academic associations, and such. So they were able to reach out to different people who may be of interest to participate in this study. So, but the participant backgrounds, and I want to show this to you because, we may think that the LGBTQ educator could be single, they could be just Christian, or they could just have this certain stereotype applied to them. But we actually had quite a range of various backgrounds participate in this study. And one is that we had three married couples, and they were legally married in their home countries, and they moved to another country to work as teachers. Sometimes not so easy. We have a married couple, for example, who went to China, a gay man, male couple, a Canadian couple, and one wasn't a teacher, but in order for him to have a visa so he could stay with his husband in China, he had to become a teacher. So it wasn't really part of his career trajectory, but he needed a visa. So few of these countries give same-sex working visas. And so that means that their partners, same-sex couples, cannot receive a visa, and the couple has to continue to come into the country as a holiday visa, or perhaps as an international student, or perhaps trying to find work on their own. Unlike a heterosexual couple that does have to, who gets an automatic visa given to the spouse, regardless if they have a job or not. So we have two sets of participants with children, which was wonderful to see, and you'll see some pictures of that coming up. And one case in the Caribbean where we had two gay men who were married. Their children do not have a working visa, so the children have to re-enter the country every 3 months on a holiday visa, and which makes it very difficult, as you can imagine, trying to plan to kind of build connections and relationships where you have to kind of always have to deport the children and then bring them back into the country. It's quite a stress, you can imagine. We had 21 teachers coming from the K-12 elementary or secondary sector, and as well as 2 from the higher education sector. There is a list on your screen of participants working in those certain different countries, and a couple areas I masked to protect the identity of the participants, because sometimes there's maybe one school in a certain country that's an international school. So if I named that actual country, someone could actually guess as to what school that would be. 14 out of 23 of these participants did disclose their sexual orientation or gender identity at work to some degree. So that means that they could maybe disclose their identity to their foreign colleagues, or maybe to the entire staff, or maybe to the entire school. So there was quite a range and spectrum based on context, based on safety, based on inclusion measures that were communicated to the participant from the school. So, Photovoice. Photovoice is an exciting research methodology. It really does help people who are part of a marginalized background who want to really communicate their stories, perhaps not through orally, but perhaps through visual means. And so here we have this type of methodology where the participants are taking photographs of their personal and professional lives. So you give the cameras to people to say, could you narrate your experiences every day and just use photographs. And then afterwards, there's a reflection session. So the participants actually analyze the data, which is the photographs, with the researchers. And that makes it exciting because then we could try to come to understand what is the experience together. And the researchers and the participants co-analyze, and have a certain type of dialogue over the photographs. So, ask questions why that photograph is taken, or why not this other photograph. So the instructions we were given them were very broad. We gave the participants the instructions to take photos of anything that was important to them. As an LGBTQ international educator, they can take as many photographs as they like, and we just ask that you do not show clear faces of individuals. So that means that not taking photos of other people, because there's a certain ethical process that underlines that these people have to be a part of it, and so we just encourage them not to take pictures of individuals, but selfies are allowed. So, and that's an important point, because while we think that participants want to make their identities confidential and anonymized, some of them are very proud to share that they were an LGBTQ educator, and really wanted to share their faces to say, this is who I am. I am a human being in this situation. And so we honored that very much whenever selfies were taken. So, and that was an important part of this process. Number of photographs received in this project were 274, and the majority of the photographs were based within a community theme. So community, could be anything outside of the school or perhaps their residences. So it could be landscapes, buildings, parks, lakes, city life, anything like that. And then we've got another theme that started to emerge, which was expressions of the LGBTQ identity. So whereas notions of culture or identity. And that could be quite a range from very explicitly a queer event or a queer kind of identity, or it could also be just a rainbow in the sky and someone's walking down the street and they're taking a picture of that, because it really symbolized and was important to them in their identity. And then we have workplaces, which are 50 of the photographs, or 18% were of schools or assignments or students or colleagues or just some school life in general. And then the personal relationships, and those are relationships that were important to the participants. And there was very few of those photographs, and there was 8%. So I'll talk a bit later on as to when we start to analyze some of what this all means, and we start to kind of consider why there was just so few of the personal relationships. So community representations. So again, this is about landscapes, buildings, or parks, or anything that a participant thought was important to them. And so here we see a local park with a dog in Thailand. And this is where the participant was trying to convey that they're really trying to find peace and some serenity in a different location, in a different country. And they came across this park and they had their dog with them. So they just caught the dog in the photograph and such. And then we've got plants in Egypt. And this was a reminder of home, because the participant was a gardener back in Ontario. And so wanted to just not only finding plants and perhaps queer life in general, but just wanted to just connect to another part of their identity, and found this garden. And then there was another participant who caught a cross-sex couple in Myanmar, and this was important to the participant because they start to imagine freedom and help them remind them what love means, what love can do, and how it can flourish and bring joy to people's lives. And they also appreciated the freedom aspect because they felt constrained that they could not do this in Myanmar. So moving forward around community representations, here we see a tent that was posted as a participant was walking on her way to school in South Korea. And she noticed this tent was set up and it says homosexuality is a sin. And that return to Jesus Christ was the other slogan there. So it was clearly sending a message that being queer is bad and negative and is a sin within biblical terms. And this is set up for people to see as they walk by it in South Korea. And then we have another image of a kind of another reminder of a Canadian favorite food, the poutine. This was taken in Japan. And this is where a participant was just really going out to a restaurant back in the days when we could, and we could see that the participant wanted to just live a little bit more of that Canadian experience, and that was important to them. And the next is a swimming pool that was taken in Hong Kong. And this reminded the educator to stay connected to personal hobbies as a way of being important to maintain wellness and exercise and continue on with your life as it happened in their home country. In that case was Canada. So overall, the depictions of the community were that of a favorite pastimes or memories, as well as concerns about safety and freedom. And finding peace and serenity were really the ultimate goal, whether that's in the immediate or perhaps long term. That's what really was necessary for this community representations in the photographs. Now, the LGBT identity representations. So this is where the participants were really looking for expressions and representations of LGBTQ culture or identity. So this was the second ranked number of photos that we received, so 25%, which tells me that this was really on the mind of the participants. They're really seeking their own identities, looking for ways that they could feel comfortable in. Now, initially, we may take a look at the photographs with the kava chip seller. It's taken at a local park in Kenya. And as much as you may think, well, what does that have to do with LGBTQ identity? That space, that park right there is known as, among the local LGBTQ population, as a space where they can go and gather, be safe, just enjoy each other's company and create new friendships. And they purchase from their kava chips, and then they sit in the park and kind of connect and meet one another. And so in a sense, queerness doesn't necessarily have to be within a discotheque, which we see in another image, but it could actually be in a park, in any location that's just culturally relevant to that space. Because you have to remember, some of these countries, for a bar or a community center to be opened up would be quite challenging. So they look for other public spaces that they can kind of queer, in a sense, to just so they have a little piece of their own. And then the second photographs here was taken from the Dutch embassy in Thailand, and the participant walking by again saw this and thought, this is part of who I am. I am part of the rainbow. I am proud to be of this LGBTQ identity, and they acknowledged the Dutch government for doing this, for giving this message in Thailand, so that they can, and it really resonated with them that the Dutch had done this. So that was really interesting to see that. And then in the next image, we see an LGBTQ disco in China. And this was important to the participants so that they could feel normal. They could feel like, oh, there's other people like me. And this is important for my own personal development, and for me to start forming some friendships and relationships within the queer community. So further on, with some more identity representations, we see the love cups in Shanghai, showing relationships of love regardless of the gender. And that was important for those when the participant was having a coffee with his boyfriend. He said, this is really representing us because there's no gender on these cups. They're just hearts. And that was really important for them, just to, they can attach themselves to some image that they can, so that they can represent who they are. And that for them, the hearts did it. It could be different for other people. In Japan, there is a participant who took this photo of the Gaylord Indian restaurant, and again, what stood out was the word Gaylord to it, because traditionally an old French meaning is Gaylord means joyful or high spirited, but then it developed into homosexual over time, and so therefore, in this context, the participant doesn't think that the restaurant owner knows that. He thinks that this was named because of the more joyful, high-spirited place to go have dinner. But he took to it. He said, "Well, that's me right there." Even though that wasn't really part of the attention for that restaurant. So just finding accidents happening, and in a wonderful way that people kind of connect to. And then we have some gender fluidity in the Caribbean to display campness and gender play, just to kind of explore who you are, how you can present yourself differently. So what I found very striking about this theme was how the LGBTQ identity was on the minds of participants, from walking down the street to noticing a rainbow or finding a queer theme sign or finding community. And they were really looking for themselves in this new country, and trying to finding a sense of belonging. Here we have workplaces as representation, so fewer photographs of the workplace. So schools, assignments, students, colleagues. Here on the first photograph, we have a trans identity and gender expression in Eastern European school, showing pride and excitement. Here are my new nails. Here's my new dress. I'm going to a graduation to see my students graduate. This is exciting. And so this participant really wanted to show her identity. The next participant talked about how he would create an LGBTQ information board for Valentine's Day in Japanese school, using their LGBTQ identity as a moment for social learning. However, what was interesting about this is that they tied in Japanese culture, queer culture, within the Valentine's Day board, as well as Western culture as well. So just to show that there could be this learning tool within the school can be used to learn about cultural differences, such as same-sex marriages in Kyoto, or evidences of homosexuality in the Shinto religion and such, as well as what's happening in the West too. So there is an opportunity for some dialogue. And here in Brazil, we have a very subtle kind of all are welcome rainbow sign here, helping students to feel as if they belong. This is probably a more of a common photograph among the photographs representing schools, that where people were looking for rainbows to put up in their schools, and then taking a picture of that because they felt that was a way to signal their this is a safer space. Further workplace representations looked at the diversity of children in Vietnam, and which showing that an LGBT teacher is also a teacher who cares deeply about their students and the accomplishments of their students. And so that was the purpose for capturing that photo of photos on the wall, because they were really proud of what their students are achieving. And in the second photo, we see a reminder to relax at work and not be stressed in China, and actually the monkey symbol, as the participant taught us, was that it doubles as a symbol of young adult gay men. So that means that they were able to, who this participant connected with, because he cannot have a picture of his boyfriend on the desk, but he can have pictures of both them being young men to show that they're still visible. They're still important parts of their lives. They just may not see the actual photograph. And here we see on the third image, using art as a therapeutic tool to express emotion in China. And I know it's maybe difficult to see on the screen, but these are very angry photos because the participant was having just a really bad day and used art to express how they were feeling about living in China as a lesbian. And so there could be very dark and difficult days to have, and it's important to have those outlets to express one's frustrations and one's emotions. And last, we have workplace representations here, and there's two images where the participants tried to purposely create further LGBT inclusive tools. So here, one in China, a participant created a buddy bench. So you can see it's rainbow decorated. And the buddy bench is for any student feeling bullied or feeling different or feeling marginalized. And they are to sit on that bench and somebody will come and join them and help them, just provide some peer support. And the same idea goes with the rainbow mat in the Caribbean. And this is where, again, marginalized students or any student who's feeling different can just come and sit there, and they would have people support them for whatever they're feeling like. So it's a way of articulating, I need help, but not actually saying those words. So the theme in general, how the workplace forms the teacher identity, and the teachers care about their schools, but they also particularly have concern over their LGBTQ students. And for some of those students, having an LGBT teacher in their school may be a rare occurrence, and they really want to gravitate to that teacher. It's no surprise to me that when the participants said that when they started showing these type of initiatives and all these different types of inclusion messages, that they received more students coming out to them when they started these projects. So relationship photo representation. This is an interesting experience with the photographs, because we just, all of a sudden we started seeing relationships, but not as much as we thought. We thought that the research would be, a safe space where they can kind of share whatever depiction of relationships they want, but still that was very much hidden within the number of photographs that we received. And so here we see a same-sex couple and their children in the Caribbean, again, confronting the heteronormative perceptions of family. And that was very important to these participants to say, we are not only a couple, we've got kids too. And they were able to connect to other parents who have kids and form a new network. And then we have a study participant and his dogs, who he considers his children in Myanmar, confronting the notion of family in general. So does the children need to be human? And he argues, no, of course, the dogs can be part of this family. What is interesting is that one of these dogs was originally adopted in Iraq when the teacher was working there, has moved around to all these different locations, so has seen quite the world, and I'm a little bit envious of that dog. Relationship representations. Again, here we see secret expression of love in Japan. So this is where participants they really wanted to hold hands on the bus, but they couldn't let that be shown. So they purposely hid their hands in the seat, but just to show that they're still going to express their love, but this may not just be so obvious, because there's just concerns about their safety. And then in the other photo, you have friends from home visiting in China, and they're highlighting that the friendship is even though they're at a distance, they're all still very connected, that people are still connected to home through their friendships. And sometimes friends can come visit, which has always been a helpful and welcomed encounter. So overall, this theme depicted different kinds of relationships, some open and some not. Contextual differences typically drove the decisions on how open the LGBTQ educator can be overseas. So an overall picture for these findings is that involvement and representation in the community are more important to the LGBT international educator than in workplaces. So the community is the most important aspect for these study participants, and not necessarily the job or the school. These educators really wish to have a flourishing and safe living situation. And then the second finding relates to how the study participants are seeking community and a sense of belonging. So where we see the expressions of the LGBTQ identity came next within the batch of photographs. So they're really seeking community connections, representations of themselves in their everyday experiences. They want to make sure that they are, part of something that they can resonate with. And then the third is that workplaces are contested spaces. So workplaces were less important in the photographs, which correlates with the 60% feeling comfortable to disclose some notion of their identity at work. So the fewer workplace photographs may be a result of fewer people wanting to disclose their identities at work. This is concerning because if the LGBTQ international educator is feeling unsupported or unwelcomed, and there were participants who described that they were facing homophobia at work, who do they go to for support? If they're in a foreign country, they don't know if the counseling, the medical or health authorities would be supportive of their LGBTQ identity. In fact, in one case in China, the gay male international educators commented on how they heard that the healthcare was homophobic within their community, and so therefore they really were not wanting to go to that healthcare center, which is serious if they're having any kind of health-related issues. So one way is that communities, so perhaps not the workplaces, but perhaps in this context, the communities are one form of support to try for information for other types of relationships. And then the fourth is that the international educators still feel closeted or isolated, even spaces where they are welcomed to express their relationships. So perhaps this could be linked to safety concerns, where people may be living in fear and therefore concerned about the documentation of the relationship. So that's probably maybe a reason why we didn't receive as many relationship photos. But also participants may wanted to express their isolation by not mentioning their relationship. So really just perhaps they are feeling isolated, and so therefore didn't provide those types of photographs with us. And could be a very valid point, because if you're the only LGBT educator in rural Kenya, you've got some battles ahead of you of how to find community and such. So before I just end, just a few recommendations here is that international education organizations need to be workplaces where LGBTQ people feel a sense of belonging and can be themselves. There should be some signal to potential LGBTQ applicants on how inclusive their schools are. So perhaps maybe that's a call for a network to be formed of some kind, where the school can assert themselves as LGBTQ inclusive to some degree, or at least have it on their radar. And the second point is that international school staff can learn a lot more about the lives of LGBTQ staff, especially where local communities condone transphobic or homophobic violence. Workplaces can therefore be transformed to a site of support. I didn't see a great deal of that in these photographs, but leaders are changing and they're learning and they're trying to create support. So let's keep that momentum and particularly focus on the LGBTQ identity. And then further research is necessary. This is really just kind of scraping the iceberg in the sense of this type of research. We need to learn more. And I found participatory methodologies helps amplify the voice of LGBTQ people, because they're co-analyzing and collecting the data and sharing the data and analyzing the data with the research team. And that's really important for them to feel that they have that agency to do that. So I'll end there, but thank you so much. And I really have appreciated this talk. I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you so much for that. So as we're just waiting for some questions to come in, as I was just also looking through some Facebook, and I'm just happy to see all the celebrations of Pride. And something that I saw was a teacher actually getting their students to blow up balloons of all the different Pride colors and just fill the hallways of that. And so it made me think about, and I realize this question for what your study, your research is about, but I'm just thinking about, the teacher-parent relationship. Mm-hmm. Right. And, and I'm not even sure what's the best word to be using, but, that sort of dichotomy where some parents may, the students may feel one thing, a person is a person is a person. Mm-hmm. Where parents may not. So I don't know if I have a specific question about that. That's what was going through my mind, is just maybe, that parents not being acceptable, of, the teachers as human beings, no matter who they love, right? And whom they express to love, especially through social media channels or whatnot. So I don't know if there's any comments you can provide on
Sure.
that.
Well, these are largely international schools where
Mhm.
these teachers are working. So therefore, they have to be excellent teachers. And if parents are seeing that their students are learning and they're performing well under their excellent teacher, the study participants communicated to me that the parents are more likely than to advocate on behalf of the teacher for the teacher to remain employed in a part of the school because they saw how much progress their children are making under these teachers. And sure,
Mhm.
these are gay teachers, lesbian teachers, trans teachers, but still the students are learning, and they're not only learning the content, they're learning about lives and their human diversity. So I wouldn't I think that parents, could very much be, it's very contextual. So parents could be
Mhm.
against this, but I saw a lot of evidence of parents being supportive too, and confronting school administration if there's ever a threat of a teacher being fired, or confronting other teachers to say, no, this teacher is going to stay because my child is learning a whole lot. So yeah.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that. You're right. At the end of the day, that's the most important thing, right? In terms of the student's ability to learn. So we have a few questions that are coming through right now. So Chris, if I could ask you to post them. We have two questions so far. Okay, so the first one, have you done research in regards to teachers in Canada? So
Yeah, good question. I have actually, but my research has been with university professors who are queer, as well as in students as well. So I've been kind of straddling international to Canadian focus as well, and so I feel like there's more work to be done in Canada, particularly particularly around those who are like my earlier research on immigrant educators to Canada really pointed to how we have to disrupt the kind of the white dominant narrative that underpins the LGBTQ identity. That there's much more richness and diversity behind that identity, and so I think that we need to continue on with that research. But yes, sure, yes, I have done research in that area, and it's been very interesting. Good comparisons can happen.
mhm. Super. Okay, thank you for that. Chris, if you're able to share the next question. Did your participants express concern for their overall safety as you were speaking earlier about safety?
Do you know that wasn't so much of a concern? We were prepared to send them photo cameras so that they can not even have their phones involved or any other personal equipment a part of, and then they could just ship those cameras back to us, and we were going to pay for the complete shipping of everything. However, every participant said, no, I'll just use my phone and I'll email you the photographs. And so I thought there would be more safety concerns, but in fact there wasn't. In fact, the selfies part spoke to be quite the opposite, that they were really wanting to share their identities. Now, not everybody. Some were more discreet, of course. They were more, trying not to share as much, but but still wanted to be a part of the study. And so we just let participants decide on that in general, and we just it just took in what they sent us.
There wasn't maybe even one country or one part of the world where there was more safety concerns than perhaps another?
Um, so I would say the participant in Kenya was probably more
Mhm.
concerned, but she is quite an activist, so she didn't care. So but she was very open about her privilege too. She says, "I'm a white Jewish woman. I've got some pull here in this international school because that's what they bring me in for as this expert." She says, so she
Mhm.
was very sensitive about her privilege and her positionality in the school, but she was still very much defending her right to include, for example, LGBTQ perspectives within sexual education, as much
Mhm.
as there is pushback from her school staff, her colleagues. Um, the other, because this was done largely on a very covert, and we also protected the participants by not sharing their countries sometimes, or the names of the schools. I think that that gave a little bit more license for them to participate in. The one participant, Myanmar, he worked in Indonesia and Iraq. Other participant worked in Saudi Arabia. they know dangerous places, but they moved because out of those places because of that. So our transgender participant, one of our transgender participants, could not transition in Saudi Arabia, but as soon as they moved to Eastern Europe, which was a purposeful choice, then they can begin their gender transition. So that was really important to find that place to where they could feel safe. Yeah.
Okay, super. Thank you for that.
Mm.
So if you could post a Slido again, there's another question. Is there anything in your research that surprised you?
Good question. So I guess that safety question that came up, I thought there would be more hesitancy from the participants, but there wasn't. They were they're activists, and they really wanted to share their photos, share themselves in their photos. So that was surprising to me. And the amount of people sending the photographs. So they were, it wasn't a matter of one or two here or there. Some of them, one sent 90 photos. There was quite a lot of photographs that we needed to sift through. So people really wanted to document their lives. And that was probably, I didn't anticipate that as much. I thought there would be a few, but I didn't expect as many as we did receive. And some of them we just couldn't use because there's so many. So we drew on the themes of the photographs more so. So there's, I guess, two areas where they were surprising.
Did you notice any differences between what level that you what they were teaching? So if they were teaching more in primary level, middle school, high school, university, college, to adult learners versus children, were there any concerns in safety, or just the number of pictures that they shared or their experiences?
It was very different. Although we only had 2 participants from the higher education sector, both had very different experiences. One was very out to his students and would share his queer research. The other one was very closeted, would not share with anybody her lesbian identity, but that was because she really felt unsafe, and she had a traumatic experience where she was almost deported for being lesbian out of South Korea. So it was, it really, part of this was their histories too, sharing, kind of buffering how much they would share about their identities. In the K-12 sector, I would say they were very proactive at trying to include more LGBTQ pedagogy, I guess you could say, in their schools. But in the sense of level of outness, they were a little bit more sensitive. So if they're in the early years, elementary years, perhaps they would not come out as much because of the stigma around, particularly, again, these are predominant, there's a lot of gay men in this. So a lot of, men in general feel stigmatized within the elementary education. So they might have held back on those identities. That's something I could say, looking back, maybe that's where something could be useful. The high school teachers, they were more open. Not saying everyone was, but they were more open in general.
It's very interesting. Chris, if you could put Slido back on, we've got another question. So it's more of a comment, and I don't know if you wanted to react to this. It's just, I commend the teachers participating and willing to teach overseas, knowing it could be dangerous.
Yes. In fact, the research on LGBTQ expats in general, and their research going on in dangerous locations, are suggesting that even the destination does not really stop the LGBTQ expatriate from going to these places. They are just more cautious, and they are they're more driven within the queer community, so they can find safety. They can know where to go, how to behave, what language to avoid and such. Like they're really trying to be a bit more careful in those places, but they're not stopping. Myself, again, I lived in Kosovo for 2 years. So I worked in teacher education during the day, and I was a queer activist at night, trying to support the local queer organizing, through trainings and establishing a community center and such. So whatever they needed, I was providing that support. And so I was doing a fair bit of involvement, and Kosovo is considered one of the most homophobic places in Europe. And so I was putting myself at risk, and I certainly did experience violence there, but I am also privileged too, that being a Canadian, I can hop on a plane and go home at any point, Local cultivars cannot do that. But if we can create systems that where they can feel supported, then and try to help with their rights movement as much as we can, then that's important. And I think it'll be great to see more of that intercultural activity as being a queer teacher working overseas, because I think there's some promise there.
And building on one of your recommendations, you're saying just about creating more of that community, right? And where they can maybe not have the same experience if they're not in the same country, but building that community of similar, shared experience as to who they are and that. So I'm not going to put the email address up because I don't want everybody to see, but there's been interest in receiving your presentation. And I just wanted to see if you are willing to share your presentation. And then on that theme, where else can our viewers today learn more, become more aware? Like what can they do, even becoming activists themselves within the community? What could you share with us on that?
Sure. So this is a very new topic for international education. There's more articles being published in, like, for example, International School Magazine, International Education magazines and such, very little research. But if you're really wanting to learn more and get involved, there is a Facebook group that's been set up for the LGBTQ international teachers, which I'm thrilled to be a part of and to watch their discussions taking place. That's been a very helpful, because somebody may post, I may be thinking about taking a job in Ethiopia. What's the situation like there? And so it's a really good, and there's over 700 people in that Facebook group, which has been, so someone's always got something to say, which is fabulous. So I think that would be a group to look up. And I think if you're an international teacher, a queer teacher, LGBTQ teacher in general, I think looking up what's been happening with, like, for example, the Every Teacher Project, which is research from the University of Manitoba and the University of Winnipeg and they surveyed anti-homophobia education across Canada and researched over 3,000 teachers' views on anti-homophobia, anti-transphobia education. So take a look at the Every Teacher Project and take a look at what's happening with the EGAL, Equality for Gays and Lesbians Everywhere, the LGBTQ rights group in Canada, and they have a special section for education in general. So there's a few websites and a few little organizations to look up, but again, this is very new territory. And of course, I'd be happy to share this PowerPoint with whoever would like to see. We need to continue the dialogue.
Absolutely. Education is the key, right? I think it's really important. Chris, if you could go back to Slido, another question has just popped up. Have there been changes in embracing diversity and the LGBTQ plus community worldwide? Is the international community becoming more liberal?
Well, it's another good question. I don't know. It's hard to say. We're at a crossroads with the international education sector, whether it's becoming more liberal or not. I feel like it's still driven from capitalism, because the international education sector is a multi-million-dollar industry. Schools make money when they have a teacher in front of them, and I don't believe that there's a strong movement to accept a lot of teachers of difference. I still think we're stuck in the Stone Ages around international education. So, and I'm talking about Black teachers, Asian teachers, teachers who have disabilities as well. I don't see a lot of momentum to encourage them to become international teachers. I think that we're still seeing them as in countries like China and perhaps in other countries where the white teacher is the dominant narrative. And so I'd like to see more diversity, but as you can imagine, running up against that capitalistic regime can be a little bit tricky. And so we have to work from advocating whenever we can from our different corners of the world for more diversity, because we know that that's what's going to help foster further student achievement and student development, as well as teacher just well-being and workplace issues. Like, it's just when you're feeling much more appreciated for being different in your workplace, you're much more likely to be productive, to collaborate, to be involved, to be energized, and be enthusiastic. So we need to look seriously at that. And I think international education has a long way to go, but it's starting to show some promise, but I think there's more work to be done.
I'm sorry to hear that. That's too bad. It would be nice if things were moving a lot quicker than they are. I was thinking as you were answering this question about, the administrative point of view, but I think that's what you're talking about, right? Is the administration that runs these schools in terms of not being as progressive perhaps as we would like them to be, or moving faster on that. So, okay.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So I'll put one last more call out for questions if anybody has them. We've had a few more comments just expressing interest in wanting to see your presentation, interesting results. So that's great. So if there's no more questions, Dr. Mizzi, is there any last final statements or anything else you wanted to share with us as a comment?
I think everything has been shared. I really encourage people to be in touch if they really want to talk about this further or share their experiences with me, and just to have a conversation in general. I think this is something that's groundbreaking within the international education research. So we need to kind of reach out to each other, and we need to make sure that everyone's feeling supported and welcomed in wherever situation they work in. And if I could be of any assistance, then please do be in touch.
No, thank you for that. And I think your work, what you're doing at the University of Manitoba, is unique even in the Canadian context in North America, being that you're Canada Research Chair. So you really are leading in this area. So thank you for all your work. And this is so interesting, and we will definitely check in again. So I encourage everybody who's been watching and listening to check out those resources that were just shared. And maybe if we can get some of those websites from you, Dr. Mizzi, we can put that in the follow-up if anybody would like to learn more, as we do have some keen alumni who do like to more and continue with their lifelong learning beyond these sessions. So thank you for that. Thank you everyone for participating for today, and especially for the Winnipeg area. It's a hot day out today, so glad that you're able to be with us at today's presentation. We'll be sending you a link to today's session and a survey to gather some feedback. I encourage you to participate. It's the only way that we're able to improve and get your ideas for more topics and presenters and whatnot. And so next week, if you haven't registered yet, next week's presentation will be Dr. Carrie Miller. She is the head of the University of Manitoba's Department of Native Studies, and she will be presenting on anti-racism practice. So thank you again, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Mizzi, and I look forward to seeing you next week.